When approaching the data reflection for the program review, like most people, I looked at this table and wondered, what do I do with this? How do I interpret it? So I began simply with looking at the title of the data and trying to figure out exactly how it was organized in the table. How was the arithmetic done? Because when you just stare at it and just see all those numbers, it's like, where did this come from? What does this mean? So I started with the idea that the data was supposed to tell me something about the attrition rates of students enrolled in our AAC classes, as well as their success rates. So I pored over that data. I even got out a calculator to try to figure out were the columns adding left or right or up or down, because it wasn't really obvious to me. I also was not afraid to actually revise the tables into a format that I understood better, because as I was going through it, I thought the layout was maybe a little confusing. It was just hard to just look at it and tell what was going on. So I revised the tables. I pulled out the information relating to the classes that were most relevant to me. There were classes in the data that actually we don't teach in the AAC, so they really weren't relevant to me. So I dropped the irrelevant data. And I also was not afraid to add in some data that I had. For example, when we talk about student success, the data I received was just a percentage of students who passed the class, basically. We also keep our own data on student success, because what we do is we pre-test and post-test students in all of our classes, and we use their amount of increase on their test as a gauge of how successful we were in teaching them. And so I added that information into my own data tables.
So for someone that is approaching the program review process and looking at the data that's provided to you through institutional research and through the Zytrex software, I think the first thing I would say to you is it's great information. Don't be afraid of it. Look at it as an opportunity to learn more about what you have been doing and to be able to reflect on what you can do with that. We spent some time together as a full-time faculty group looking at the data pieces that we had received, and the one that was particularly helpful to us was one that addressed each course, and it addressed it over time, a 3-year period of time, and it looked at each course in both the teaching format of face-to-face and the teaching format of online. So we were able to look at each course, each format, and over a 3-year time period. What we were able to do was to look at and kind of mark on some of those sheets whether there was a pattern of movement in whatever the category was, either in an upward or a downward direction. So in other words, I was really looking for trends. And actually there certainly were some. There were some related to certain courses. There were some trends related to face-to-face versus online. So when you look at those kinds of trends, it's helpful then to have a discussion about that. The kinds of things that we were looking at that point in time were, could we really explain that trend? Perhaps there actually had been something significant that had happened. Perhaps a particular course had been either added or deleted from a particular certificate or degree program that might have impacted the enrollment numbers in it. It might have impacted student success potentially. So we were first of all saying what happened during the time frames that we were looking at. So what happened was one of those issues.
When I had this information in hand, then I looked for patterns in the data. I looked for, obviously, which classes had the most successful students, which students were less successful, as well as the attrition rates. When I was reflecting on the data, I looked at a couple classes in particular that were interesting. I realized that The students in this class actually are highly successful if they persist through the class. If they actually complete the work and get the work done, they all had strong grades, A, B, C, very successful students. So our issue in that class is more one of math avoidance, of students who just don't stay the course. Because if they do stay with the course, they are successful. And that's something that I saw in the data trends.
We wanted to see our courses in our program, but also a comparative institutional line that let us know whether we were trending greater than or less than what the overall institution had done. Secondly, we thought that there was probably data available specifically through iPads that might have given us some better direction on things like transfer rates or success rates. But the other category that we were particularly interested in had to do more with future planning. But what we really wanted to see was a regional industry sector needs and demands or projections for employment, thinking that we could take that information and then loop that back into where we're trying to go with our program and for our students. Again, my thoughts are welcome the opportunity for program review. It is time consuming, but it is worth one's time. You can learn a lot about yourself. You can learn a lot about what your team is collectively doing, and you can certainly learn about ways that we can improve what we have to offer for our students.